Hi, welcome back to the training webinar. I'm Dale Franks, and today we are going to talk about metadata, why it's in the product, and how you can use it. To do that, we need to first talk about a little issue with Process Director and its reporting. So I need to share my screen. There we go. We are sharing now, and I have noticed that I am missing questions on occasion from people. So I need to move the little bar up here to the top of the screen. Excuse me while I do that so that I can see when you hit the Q&A button that you actually have a question. Apparently on the last Spotlight webinar, there were a couple of questions. I missed them because my notification was way at the bottom of the screen. So pardon me while I fix that. Let's talk about the problem with reporting in Process Director, which is that it is granular. Most of the time, when you want to return information in Process Director, you're going to go to a knowledge view and you're going to create a knowledge view. One of the issues with knowledge views, of course, is that I can either see everything on the system, or I can go to the Properties tab and I can confine my results to a specific form. I mean, most of the time we're returning form instances. And when we do so, generally we want to see all the form instances for a particular form definition. So we go to the Properties tab and we open up a form definition and we say, okay, fine. I only want to see stuff from the document library form. On a day-to-day basis, that's fine, because that's probably 90% of your use of knowledge views, returning data from a single application, usually that application's form, although occasionally we'll return the process timeline instance rather than the form instance. But however we do it, it's generally either we don't configure anything on the Properties tab, in which case the system will return everything, or we have to confine our results to a specific form or a specific process timeline. There is no feature where I can just say, okay, well, I want to see this form and this form. Oh, I'm sorry, this form, and this form. So I want to see these three forms. Well, there's no real way to do that simply by the knowledge view alone and trying to configure it on the Properties tab. There is also a larger issue that this touches on, which is that I might have multiple applications that I all want reported at the same time, but they're not really linked inside Process Director. If I was to look at a normal application folder like mine, as you can see, I have many different applications in this folder. These are all the training webinar samples that I've built over the years. Some old stuff that I've replaced, so I have two versions of it, but for the most part, I have all of these different applications. And inside each of these applications, if we go back and look at the one that I'm looking at now, that's Spotlight webinar, not what I wanted. Training webinar. I wanted to close archive. If we look at my metadata folder, I've got four subfolders, sorry, of different applications that are running inside the metadata folder. I'd like to unify my reporting for all of these applications. And to do so, I'm going to need to create some method of making that happen. So if we take a look back here at our form KView knowledge view, the one that we're looking at right now, if I was to update and run this, we'll note that it's returning form instances that have three different icons. Well, I've got my document library form, which has its own form instances, and I've got my grievance complaint form. There's only one grievance, and there's only one leave request in my leave application. Now, in this particular case, all three forms are in the same folder. I just do that for ease of navigation and use. There's no reason to create three fully flashed applications to do this because the principle is the same. I have three different forms, let's call them applications, that I want to report some data on. And I can do that only because Process Director has a metadata system that enables me to take these three different applications and unify them into a single knowledge view via category navigation. So right now I'm in my training category, and we'll talk about categories and attributes in a minute. And here's my documents, and then I have some subcategories. I have some HR documents, and I have a different for set of IT documents. And then I have a forms category where I've got these other two forms that appear. So I have metadata that enables me ultimately to either look at specific items that relate to some sort of specific categorization that I've created. And again, this is the same knowledge view. I'm returning two form instances from two different form definitions. They're all unified via metadata. So let's talk about metadata, what it is, and how it works. Metadata is high-level data about data. I think the last time we talked about this, I used the analogy of a library. Let's say that you go to a university library. We'll use a university library since many of you are higher ed customers. Now, inside a library, I have publications of all kinds. Everything that's in the library is a publication of some sort. Now, there may be different types of publications. I might have books. I might have research papers, published papers. I might have theses. I might have periodical journals, Nature, Science, JAMA, The Lancet. I've got right there 4 different categories of publication. So if I have a book and I wanted to organize it in my library via metadata, I would have to create some categories for that book. It obviously is a book. A book is a publication. So that one book has 2 categories, book and publication. If it was a periodical journal of some kind, then it would be a publication and a journal. It would have 2 different categories, although both the book and the journal would be in the publications category. It gets a little more complex when we start talking about each individual book or each individual publication, because each one of those publications, while they're, let's take a book, for example. I have 5 books. Now, each one of those books is in the book category, and the book category is a subcategory of publications. But each of those books has some specific attributes that are different between each book. Each book has an author or authors, but the authors are always different. But every book has an author. Every book has a publication date. Similarly, every periodical has a publication date. So, and every periodical probably doesn't have an article, but not an article, it doesn't have an author because there'd be multiple authors. So we probably couldn't track author there, but both books and periodicals have a publication date. Technically, movies have a publication date, which we call the release date, but it's a publication date of some kind. So I've got 3 different items: book, periodical, a movie, all of which have a publication date. Now, obviously, that publication date is going to be different for every single book, or every single movie or periodical, but they all have a publication date. And so that is an attribute that they all share. It is some type of information about that book or periodical that is shared between basically all publications. In Process Director, we have a metadata system that does the same sort of thing. You can access the metadata administration menu if you have permission to see it via the metadata administration menu or menu item that appears in the settings menu at the top of the screen. If you don't see the metadata administration menu item, it means that you haven't been given access to it. In Process Director, if we go into user administration and we open up a user, let's open up Barb here. If I want to make Barb a metadata admin and give her access to the metadata administration menu, I simply need to click that checkbox right there that says metadata admin. So the way that I get access to the menu is by being a metadata admin. Once I am set up in the system as a metadata admin, I see the menu, I click on it, and it takes me to the metadata administration screen. Metadata is divided, just like all content is, into separate partitions. So if I have multiple partitions on a system, and while I technically do have multiple partitions on this system, this user identity only gives me access to the default partition. So I can't switch between partitions on this system, even though there are, I think, like 5 different partitions for different people on this system. But this is my partition, logged in with this account anyway. And so the only partition I see is the default partition. For most of you, that will be true. But some of you, when you're logged in, will see multiple partitions because your system is set up into different partitions. Well, metadata, like everything else, is segregated on your system by partition. So setting metadata on one partition has no effect whatsoever on the metadata that you might have in a second or third partition. In fact, the only way to get that metadata onto multiple partitions is to create it on one partition and then ideally export it from that partition and import it into another partition. We'll talk about that in a little bit. For right now, I only have one partition, so there's nothing for me to select here, so I can go straight to metadata administration. And when I go to metadata administration, now that gives me access to all of the categories and the attributes that I have on my system. So we're going to build some things today in the webinar. As you can see, I have some stuff already built, which we'll probably refer to here and there during the presentation. But for right now, I need to create some metadata. Now, the thing about metadata is I can't actually apply it to any object on the system unless it exists. So I really do need to create my metadata first before I add it to the system. There are a couple of caveats that I would add here about metadata and its use. One of which is that metadata can become quite complex. And you need to think about how your metadata will scale when you start building categories and attributes on your system. Because as I said, it can be complex. I can have a single hierarchical metadata system so that everything all eventually goes up to the same parent category at the top. Or I can, as I've done here, have multiple parent categories. However you do it is up to you. I think having a main category is less flexible in terms of how you would build it out, and it may have scalability problems if your metadata starts getting complex. On the other hand, it does give you a reporting structure where you can go up a single reporting tree and report on anything in the system. And ultimately, technically, I suppose you could report on everything in the system if you started off with a single parent category and you only built subcategories from there. I'm not saying that one system is better than the other. I think if you are doing multiple parent categories, you have a lot more freedom to just create categories on the fly without having to worry about the overall effect it has on the category tree. On the other hand, if you have multiple categories like this in a knowledge view, I can only go up to one top level category, right? So if I was to pick policies as the category that I wanted to use in a knowledge view, that would leave out everything in administration, bid process, cross application, et cetera, et cetera. That may be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you want your system split up and how you want your system segregated and how you want your reporting to work. For example, I might have stuff like HR stuff that I don't want to have included in a single parent category. So while you might think, well, it's nice and logical to have one single parent category and then to branch out to multiple categories, yeah, sure, except if I want to segregate that HR data out, I really can't, because now it's part of the same category tree. And if I create a knowledge view that gives people access to the appropriate level of that category tree, if they start navigating up that category tree towards the top, at some point, their query is going to include those HR documents that I want to keep the general population from seeing. I can do that if I have multiple parent categories. Can't really do that if I have a single category that goes all the way up the tree. On the plus side, I can fix that by the permissions settings that I have on the individual content list objects. So while the HR category might be included in a single category tree that includes everything on the system, I could backstop that by having permissions that simply don't allow end users view items permissions or view children permissions on any of the content list objects in HR. And if I do that, well, then I'm probably good to go, because they just simply can't see them. The knowledge view will not return objects that the end user, whoever's viewing the knowledge view, doesn't have permission to see. So it's not that I can't keep them secret, not that I can't keep people from seeing them, but it does complicate my job as a system administrator in ensuring that if I'm going to use a single parent category in metadata, it does ensure that while users can't see them, I have to put in the extra work of being very rigorous in how my permissions methodology works in the content list. Also, while metadata makes things a lot easier for your end users in terms of reporting entire categories of object anywhere they may exist in the system, which is cool, it's going to impose an additional requirement on you as the system administrator to actually ensure that you have the proper categories, that they're kept up to date, that the proper attributes are there. Sometimes you may have to add or remove attributes. As new applications are created, you may have to go back in and not only create the new metadata categories that cover that application, but you may also need to go in and change permissions. And you may need to go into the folders and set up metadata for inheritance, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So metadata is very useful. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking that it makes our job as administrators easier. It doesn't. In fact, it complicates them. And if you have some weird, unplanned metadata system, it's going to create more of an administrative burden, perhaps, than you want to undertake. So you have to think very carefully about your metadata, because before you can assign metadata anywhere, it has to exist. The metadata has to be created first. And indeed, because metadata sort of exists outside the content list, way up at the partition level, You have to remember that if you create an application that incorporates a new metadata category or attribute, you're going to have to create the metadata first, then create the application. Although sometimes you don't know that you need metadata until you're halfway through with the application. Okay, fine, we can create the metadata there, but we can't apply it until it's created. But when I export that application, I can't import it into a production system because it uses new metadata. So I've got to export my metadata from my dev system first, and I have to import it prior to importing the application. Because if I try to import the application on a system where my new metadata doesn't yet exist, my import report is going to show that I am missing metadata categories or attributes. And so therefore, I'm going to have a bad import. I'm going to have to import the metadata and then re-import the application again. So metadata thus adds to your export import workflow in that you've got to ensure that the metadata on both systems are exactly the same before you import applications between those two systems. So with those administrative and introductory considerations taken care of, let's actually look at creating some metadata. There are two types of metadata. One is categories. Everything has a category. Every item in that category shares that category with every other items. Categories are immutable. If there is a book category, you're going to put the book in the books category. The category books will never change. So it is, as I said, immutable. So if I want to create a category here, and we'll call this category webinar, all I have to do is click the create category button, and it's going to open up the create category screen. I'm going to create a category called webinar, and I can give it a description, which we'll do real quick. Training webinar, because I should put in a description anytime that I'm allowed to. And so now I have a new category. Once I have this category, I can create the subcategories for it really easily. All I have to do is click on it, and I can click on create subcategory, and it will create a category under webinar. So we will call this category documents. Well, actually, let's call it form. Well, no, let's have two. We'll have one called documents, and in the interest of time, I'm going to elide past creating descriptions, but you should not do that. And I can create a second subcategory here, and I'll call it forms. Great. And then in each of these subcategories, I can create additional subcategories for them and ultimately create a tree. So I'm just going to go with IT and HR. And create subcategory, and we'll call it HR. Now, this is where it gets tricky because I have webinar, I've got documents, I've got HR and IT, and that's for documents. But what about forms? Do I want an HR and IT for documents and forms? I don't know. Maybe this is not the best way of doing this. Maybe I should reverse it and have webinar and then have the HR section and then the IT section. And each one of them should have a documents and forms subcategory. Or maybe there shouldn't be a subcategory like this. Maybe it should all be IT or HR. And I should make those categories co-equal with documents and forms. This is kind of complex, and I don't really have any advice for you on how to set this up. So you need to think about how you're going to report these items. And you're also going to need to think about how the attributes are going to work as well. Because every single one of these categories, remember, which are mutable, have the attributes. Right? So let me clear these out. Let's do it like this. Let me clear out all of these. I'm just going to click on the checkboxes, and I'm going to delete, and I'm going to delete all of those subcategories. Let's actually do it this way. Let's actually create a subcategory called publications. Since I've already used that as an analogy, we'll have our publications category. In fact, I think in this case, I probably don't even need the webinar category. I could probably just put publications up here at my top level, but that's fine. We'll do it this way. We'll have publications. And for publications, I'm going to want some subcategories. So I'm obviously going to want books. And actually, we'll just call it book. And I want one called periodical. Periodical sounds like a medication. Periodical. And we'll make another one, and we'll call it research paper, since we're pretending we're doing a university library metadata set. And I'll have one more, which I will call film. Okay, now this makes some sense to me. And what it allows me to do is to set up attributes in a logical way. So let's go up to publications. Let's talk about attributes. Now, categories are immutable. They never change. This category will always be publications. Well, technically, that's not true. I mean, I can change the name at any time, but whatever name I give this category is going to be shared by every single item in that category. Attributes, though, are different because they're going to be different for each item. So in addition to categories, I can store attributes. Now, every single publication has a publication date or a release date. We'll call it pub date. Okay, great. So I want to store that attribute for each of these 4 categories. So the question then becomes, do I build the attribute in each of these 4 categories? No, I don't. I need to build the attribute at the lowest level at which that attribute is shared by all the subcategories. So in this case, all 4 of these subcategories are going to need a publication date attribute, but I don't want to put it here. I want to put it in publications. And the reason I want to put it in publications is because every book, film, or periodical has a publication date. So this is the appropriate level for the publication date attribute. So I can create that attribute here. So we're going to call it pub date. And we can have this as text, number, checkbox, date, or currency. I'm going to go ahead and make it a date. And then I'm going to click Add New Attribute. And now I have this new attribute called pub date that exists up here at the top level of the system. And I can edit this item by clicking the Edit This Item icon. It takes me into my attribute editing screen, and I can make changes to it here. There is this external name. We're not going to talk about the external name much at all. This is largely for a more complex metadata system where the metadata system is coming from some sort of external item. It was put in the product for one specific customer, for one specific use. So I'm pretty confident in saying you will never use, you as an end user will 99.99% certainty never use this attribute. And since that is so, I'm going to tell you that it exists, but we're not going to talk about it anymore because, frankly, you're never going to use it. What you care about is the attribute name and the attribute's data type. whether it's date, text, and number, or whatever. So great. Now I have this attribute pub date that exists at the publications level. So anytime that I input a book or a film or a periodical, it's going to need a publication date, and that publication date is going to be saved up here at the edit category, or at the publication category level. And thus, it will be a shared attribute between all of these different items. But of course, even though the attribute is shared, the value of the attribute will be different for every single book that I bring into the library, because every book will have a different publication date. If I didn't have periodicals in here, I would probably do the same thing with the author. Periodicals don't have author, although I guess we could, there is one thing that they share is everything has a publisher or a producer of that video. So I could have another attribute up here at the publication level where I would just call it the publisher. And so that would be whoever published that item. And of course, if it's a film, the publisher may be another university. It may be a production company or a Hollywood studio, but there'll always be a publisher. Obviously, this is going to be text, and I can add that attribute. Something else I might want to add that would be useful would be keywords, which would also be text, and I can add in a keywords attribute. So I can add all kinds of attributes for publications, and I can set those attributes one way or another, usually in a form. And when those attributes are set, it will automatically apply the appropriate value inside the metadata for that particular publication. So let's take a look at how this might work in the real world. We now have some categories and we have some attributes. Now, if I had some special attribute, I'm trying to think of something that would be different for a book, film, or periodical. So a periodical is probably the one that would be different. What would a periodical have on its, oh yeah, periodical might have its own attribute, which would be the issue number, right? Because research papers, books, and films, they don't have issue numbers. But if I wanted the issue number for a periodical, I could just put that here, and that would be a text attribute. And now only the periodical has an issue number. So we have metadata categories. We have some attributes. Let's talk about how to apply them. Metadata, like permissions, is inheritable. So if I set metadata on any parent object, then every object that I create under that parent is going to apply that metadata or inherit that metadata. So applying metadata to the object definition is the first of 3 ways that we can apply metadata. Actually, before we do this, let me go back and take a look at our metadata settings one more time. I've shown you how to create some data. We're not going to actually use this. We're actually going to use this training category here. So I think we should look at it. And let me just hit OK there so we can just see our metadata. So in the training category, and that's going to be the parent category of all the metadata that we're going to use in all of our forms, so that basically we can see like to like as we look at the examples that I have over here and the stuff that I'm about to build. There is a document subcategory, and each of these documents fall into IT and HR. There's a separate category for forms and a separate category for images. If I look in the documents category, it has two attributes, effective date and keywords. So each one of these documents has an effective date and keyword, and the HR and the IT categories are just to divide the two different types of documents I'm going to add. What this enables me to do is to have this hierarchical structure replicated in a knowledge view, which we'll talk about last, that uses category navigation to actually navigate through the metadata categories from some specified starting point and pull all of my documents. And then I can also narrow down my search in the knowledge view by selecting only HR documents or only IT documents. But all of my documents, whether they're HR or IT documents, have an effective date and keywords. Now for forms, these are just forms. There are no documents associated with them. This documents category are for items in a document library that I'm building. And I want to return these documents to end users, and I want them to be able to search my document library using metadata to find documents. Now, in the forms, I don't necessarily want them to do that level of search, but I do want to separate the forms that exist in this category, this training category, from the documents that I'm going to upload into the system. And these are those two forms, like the grievance complaint and the leave request. They don't really have documents associated with them. They're just plain old forms, but I want them in the training category so that I can find them if I need to find them. And then I have a category called images. It doesn't have any attributes. Forms does have two attributes, the form type and the release date. So we can set those attributes there, but we're mainly going to concentrate here on the documents and setting up the metadata for these documents since they already exist. So now let's go back to our folder. So as I said before I went on that digression, metadata is inheritable. So I can, just like I do for permissions, I can go into the properties of this webinar folder, and it has a metadata tab. And on that metadata tab, I can assign metadata to all of my objects in that folder. So if I just want to assign metadata, and let's say, okay, fine, we're going to go into training and we're going to assign documents as the metadata for this particular folder. And then because keywords and effective date are part of the attributes of the documents category, they also show up here. Now remember, each document is going to have its own unique keywords and its own specific effective date. If I set the attributes here in my folder, then every single document will inherit the values that I set in these particular attributes. On occasion, I may want that. I think in most cases, I don't. And certainly in the implementation that we're looking at today, I want to provide these attributes in the form itself. So I don't want to fill these out here, because if I fill them out here, these attributes, it's going to apply them to every single object that gets created in the system. But these are always going to be different, so I don't want to do that here. So happy I am with what I have here. I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm going to save my folder and go back into it. Now, I had an existing item in this folder. Let's take a look at it. I have this form, this sample metadata form. We'll go to its metadata. Oh, no metadata has been assigned. Well, there's a reason for that, because just as permissions have to be replicated to existing objects when you change permissions, The same thing applies to metadata. Metadata also has to be replicated. And I have two methods of doing this. I have the add metadata to all items and the replace metadata for all child items. Now, in my case right now, it doesn't matter which of these two buttons I click because my sample metadata form doesn't actually have any metadata assigned to it. If I do have metadata assigned to it, then the difference between those two buttons, add metadata to all child or replace metadata, are super important. We're going to assign some metadata. And in this case, we are going to go into training and we're going to assign this forms as the metadata. So metadata is assigned to the sample metadata form. And I'm not going to worry about the attributes here because, again, I would want to set these attributes elsewhere, but they exist. And I now have metadata on that form. So let's go back into the folder and let's see what happens when I click these two buttons. So if I click add metadata to all child items, I click it, it happened, it was like magic, and I go back and I look at my form, no, things have changed. I'm still in the training category, but now I've been assigned to both documents, which was set by the folder, and forms. So now this is in all of these different categories. And you know what? That's probably fine in many cases. In fact, the same document may be in multiple categories, which means that depending on what metadata category I'm looking for or searching in a knowledge view, this document, now that it is in multiple categories, will actually show up in multiple places in the category navigation in my knowledge view. And there's no limit to the number of different categories to which a single object might be associated. And if I associate it in multiple categories, then it'll allow me to find it in multiple categories when I'm running my knowledge view. This ability to assign many different metadata categories and attributes to a specific object makes metadata extremely flexible in terms of how you can search for and find objects on your system. And so there's nothing wrong with having these multiple metadata categories added along with all of their attributes to this particular object. That may in fact be what you want. On the other hand, it may not be what you want, in which case that second button is important. Because when we click the add metadata to all child items, it did exactly what the button implies. It simply added these two categories, and technically it didn't even add the training category because that category was already added, but it did add the documents category, and it just added it to the existing metadata. So if I have existing objects that already have metadata assigned to them, and I don't want to mess with that data, but I do want to add some new metadata, then the add metadata to all child items button is super convenient. If, on the other hand, I want to only have my items in this folder be assigned to the categories that I specify at the folder level in the folder's metadata tab, then I would click replace metadata for all child items. And that's going to result in something a little bit different, which is that it is going to overwrite any existing metadata with the metadata that I have specified in my folder. So this is the more dangerous of the two options, the replace metadata. And note, when I clicked that button, there were no takesies, backsies. I replaced the metadata. So that sample metadata form that had the other category in it, the forms category, that's gone. That's been overwritten. That has been erased. So think carefully about how you're going to replicate that metadata. The add metadata is always the safest option unless you're absolutely sure that you just want to blow away all the existing metadata on existing objects and create it. Obviously, if you do this up front on your folder, then you don't really have to worry about it, because as I create new objects, so we'll call it form 2, and we don't really care about editing it or anything. So once it's been created, we can just look at form 2 and we can go to its metadata tab, and it automatically inherited the metadata of the folder. It's great to be able to do that, although as we talk about item 2 in our ways of assigning metadata, while it's cool to be able to do this, it is not necessarily required. So let's delete this form since we don't need it at the moment. Let's do a little editing of our sample metadata form. Now, there are 2 attributes that we want to apply: keywords and effective date. And I don't remember whether I set effective date as a string or a date, but I think I set it as a, well, I don't know. Now I got to go back and look, because this may be, I just want to know how I set it up. So we'll go into documents, and it is set up as text. Okay, fine. We'll live with it as text. I'm happy with that, I guess. The reason that I care is because it's going to determine how I do it on the form. In fact, how did I do it on the form? Now that I think about it, did I just put in a, yeah, I just put in a date picker and just let the system do the translation. Although we'll go back and we'll look at this a little bit later. After I demonstrate how this works, we'll take a look at it working. So we'll just deal with the keywords attribute at the moment. So I'm going to go into the form, and obviously the form needs a keywords attribute. So I have this field here. It's currently called input 1, but we're going to call it keywords. And then we're going to go to its field properties. And for each field on a form, there is a property called link to attribute. And what this allows me to do is link a form field directly to a metadata attribute. So I can click on the build button here next to the link to attribute property, and it will show me my hierarchy of metadata on the system. I can go into training. I've got documents. That's great. And then I've got keywords as this attribute right here. So I'm going to click on this keywords link. And when I do, the attribute is now linked. So we now have a form field that links to this attribute. So I want to do something here to my form. I'm going to save this right now. Actually, what I should have done is not do that yet, because I wanted to demonstrate something and I've gotten ahead of where I was. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to have to back up from where I was. Got a little bit ahead of myself. I want to go back to my form, and I actually want to unlink this for the moment. We are going to have to come back and relink it. But let me just run that back to no selection. So there is no link to attribute. And we'll resave our form. And we're going to go back in to the sample metadata form after it saves. And we're going to remove the metadata that is set on the metadata tab. We're going to just turn the metadata off on this form. Under normal circumstances, because this form already has metadata applied to it, when I create a new form instance, so I open up a new form and I submit it, the new form instance gets created, it's going to inherit this metadata, and it's going to put stuff in the documents category. Something I don't think I mentioned, but I think is important to get in mind early, is because training or because documents is a subcategory of training. When I assign myself the documents category, or I assign an object to the documents category, it automatically gets assigned to every parent category all the way up the tree in the metadata tree. Now, in my case, the tree here is really short. It only goes up one level to training. But because I've applied the documents category, the training category automatically gets applied because however low I go on the category tree, if I pick a lower category, all of the higher categories automatically get assigned as well. So if I had a fairly extensive tree, simply by assigning the documents category, I might have a whole bunch of other categories that are listed up here because I've picked something fairly low down in a extensive category hierarchy. You just need to remember that selecting a lower level category, selecting a subcategory selects all of its parent categories right up to the root level of the category tree. However, I don't want this, I don't want to have this metadata here on my form definition. I actually want to turn this off. So I don't want to assign anything. So I'm just going to uncheck those metadata categories. Now, talking about that inheritance, if I click documents, notice that training also gets clicked. If I uncheck training, which I did a moment ago, well, obviously, if I can't be in training, I can't be in any of its subcategories. So unchecking training automatically unchecks documents. So selecting a lower category always includes all the parent categories. Turning off a parent category always turns off all of the lower categories. So now I'm back to no metadata at all. So I have no metadata, and on my form controls, I have no form control. Let's delete input one since I renamed it. Fine. So now I've only got one form control. It's called keywords. And right now it's just a form control. Doesn't do anything, doesn't link to any attributes. And so if I didn't mean to do that, but fine, we'll run it. If I run this form and I just type in a keyword, I submit my form. Let's go in and take a look at my form instance. We'll open up the properties for the form instance, and we'll open it up, and there on the metadata tab, there's nothing. Okay, now let's go back to our form. Let's go back in the design view, and now let's link this to the attribute. So go to the field properties, we'll go to link to attribute. Once again, we'll go into training. We'll pick the keywords attribute of documents, and we'll save and close our form. Actually, I probably should have saved and run the form. So once it closes, we'll run her again. It's not going to update the form. And this time I can type in, I don't know why I'm using book categories, but okay, I did. So I've typed in a couple of keywords. I've separated them by commas because that's just how I wanted to do it. This is basically just a text field. I could put anything I wanted in here. I technically don't need commas. It's just a free text field, but I'm going to go ahead and submit the form. Now let's go back and look at our form instances again. And let's take a look at the properties for this form. And this form has metadata assigned to it. When I create a form field and I link that form field to the attribute, when I submit the form, it is automatically going to, as we saw here, assign the proper keywords attribute to that form, but it's also going to automatically apply both the training and documents category for that form, because the link to attribute automatically applies the categories that match my keywords. So that's pretty cool. I now have this automatic assignment. So the first way of applying metadata, which is doing it at the folder level, or at the very least the parent object level, and letting inheritance work, is great. And in fact, you may have to use it. There may be some metadata categories that I want assigned automatically to a document. And then inside the document itself or the form itself, I may have an entirely different category that has some attributes that I want to assign. And simply by linking to those attributes, it will assign to this particular instance not only the metadata that it inherited from its parent object, the form definitions say, when it was created. So it'll have that metadata. But when I do the link to attribute, it will also have the metadata for potentially both categories and attributes from potentially an entirely different part of the metadata taxonomy tree. So I can do both. Again, metadata is super flexible. Now, in this particular use case, I would not set any metadata at the folder level because my form is already applying the keywords attribute in this case. And by applying the keywords attribute, it's automatically going to include these categories. I don't really need to set these categories up at the folder level. I mean, I can. It doesn't hurt anything. And my document, whenever I create it, or my form will automatically, inherit those categories. That's fine. But if I am going to be using the link to attribute, I technically don't need this. Doesn't hurt anything if I have it at the folder level, but I don't need it. Where it might be important to apply categories at the folder level is obviously if the categories that are applied here are in a different part of the category tree than the categories that will be assigned when I fill out the attribute on the form. Again, flexibility is key here, but if I'm actually going to be assigning this attribute in the form, this keywords attribute, then it's automatically going to assign the categories. So I don't need to put them in the folder level, but it is an option that's available to me simply for the sake of flexibility. Now, there is a third way of applying metadata, and that is with the set metadata custom task. So let's go back to my form. I want to be able to set a little different metadata in this form. In fact, here is my problem. I am linking this to this attribute here, which is this attribute here, keywords, which will include the training category. Good. I want that. And it will also include the documents category, which is also good, which I also want. Here's what it doesn't do. This form, is this an HR form or is this an IT form? Well, I've got to find some way of making that distinction. I've got to apply that category. I don't really have a place to apply it except by using a custom task that will apply that category for me on the fly. So that's exactly what we're going to do. What we're going to need on this form is a metadata control, and there are two of them, two metadata controls, I mean. There is a category picker and a metadata picker, and I am desperately trying to get that cursor right there so that I can make a new line. So in my other input controls, I have both a category picker and an attribute picker. They both work the same kind of, and they're both going to be run by the set metadata custom task. And I actually have a fully working version of it. We're just going to walk through the process here, and then we're going to look at the actual completed application and see how it works in real time. But for right now, let's just drop a category picker onto the form. Now, the category picker by itself doesn't do much. It allows me to pick, as the name implies, a category. But just because I've picked a category doesn't mean that anything happens to it. So we're going to drop this category picker on here. We're going to have to set a starting category. Now, for me, I'm going to set the starting category as training. This is something I really dislike. I dislike doing text matching, but it's what we got. We're going to live with it, but I hate doing that for the starting category. I think probably in most cases, I would just delete that. I don't think my metadata system is complex enough that requires me to set a specific starting category. And the trouble with doing the text matching is if I have two categories that have the same name, that's going to get confusing for the system. So I'm not going to do anything here. And the category picker by itself doesn't do much. Now I'm going to make it do something. I'm going to make it an event field. And I'm going to use that event to call my set metadata custom task. We're not going to configure that yet, but we are going to go ahead and run the form real quick. And we'll just see how the category picker works. And like I said, there's both a category and an attribute picker. They both work in sort of a similar fashion. Although I think in most cases, it's the category picker that you're going to use, not the attribute picker. Because if you're going to set attributes, we're already doing that in a form field. That's the easiest way to do it. But here's my category picker control. It's basically just an object picker control. That's its physical appearance on the form. And if I click on it, it opens up my metadata, and I can go to documents, and I can go to HR, and I technically could submit this form. But if I do, I'm just going to tell you, nothing's going to happen. I'll submit the form. And once again, we'll go to form instances, and we'll look at the one that I just created. Okay, well, that's nice. It has a value of HR, not what I wanted to look at. What I wanted to look at was here. And am I looking at the right thing? Because in general, oh, all right. A little complicated. I need to explain. It does have documents and training assigned to it. It has documents and training assigned to it because the field is set to set up keywords. So even though I didn't fill out a value in keywords, it automatically is going to assign that. The category I picked in the category picker was HR, and that does not, in fact, show here. So we're not seeing the HR category because even though I have a category picker and, it works, it doesn't actually do anything. I can open this up and I can change categories all day. And it doesn't matter. That category just never gets assigned. That's why we have the set metadata custom task. So I actually need to go into the form itself and go to the custom task event mapping, and I need to select my custom task. So there is a metadata section, and the one that I want in this particular case is set metadata. We'll add that custom task. We're going to set that custom task on our category picker event. So we're going to pick category picker 2. And now I can go ahead and configure that custom task. So what items are we going to want it set for? In my particular case, in this particular case, I only have a form. So we're just going to set it for form only. I'll click form references just in case I decide to throw a upload control on here. Although I'm not gonna, I've got that built. We'll take a look at that. Set object types to set. Well, we'll set it all. And item group, obviously, if I have multiple groups, like if I had document uploads and I had different uploads of different document and they were set in different document groups, I could apply metadata to not only to the form, but I could apply it to specific documents that were in a specific group. It's the group name. It works just like group names do everywhere else in Process Director. The important thing here is to go to the add category, and I got two ways of doing it. I can either manually set the metadata category that I want to apply, or I can do what I want to do in this case. I want to select whatever category is specified in category picker 2 so that that becomes the category. So I'm going to use the front end of the product to set the category. I can certainly add a category manually if I want to. On this custom task, I can just go and pick it, but for our use case, and I think for most use cases, we want it set from the category picker. You should just be aware that you can hard code categories using the set metadata custom task. So with this set up properly, that should be all I need to do. I should be able, well, in fact, I should be able just to go back. Let me hit OK. Let me save my form. Let's go back to our form instance. Now that I've changed the form definition, what I should be able to do is just pop this instance open, go back in here, pick HR, and you may have noticed very briefly the form kind of reloaded. I'm not even going to close it. I'm going to keep it open here, and we're going to go and look at the properties on that particular instance, which again, still open, haven't submitted it yet, but I know the custom task ran because I am now assigned the category training.documents.hr. So my set metadata custom task worked. It chose the category that I wanted to choose. I could have done this with a attribute picker, but there's no attribute down at this level. So the category picker was the proper one. Obviously, if you choose an attribute, if it assigns an attribute, it will assign that attribute's category and all parent categories for that attribute. So great. I now have this document in HR, and I didn't submit it. I think I just closed it, or did I submit it? You know what? It doesn't matter because the metadata has already been assigned. So who cares what I did to the form? The second I changed the category picker, it assigned the appropriate metadata to this form. That is the third method of the 3 of assigning metadata to an object. In most cases, this is how you're going to assign it. In most cases, you're either going to assign it using the link to attribute property, or you're going to assign it via the set metadata custom task if you want people to pick it on the fly. So the link to attribute doesn't give the user any choice about metadata that they can apply to the object. You're just specifying that by using link to attribute. If you want to give the users the choice, the ability to set either categories or attributes on the fly, you can certainly do that, but you are going to have to use the set metadata custom task to take whatever categories or attributes that they have selected on the form to be able to apply that to the form. Now, as you saw, we're simply doing that as a form event on the form definition itself. So you don't have to worry about when it's going to be submitted. And the other thing that it enables you to do by having it on the category picker like that is, sure, it's going to run it a lot more times, but it's going to give them the ability to just set these categories on the fly, and they just automatically get applied whenever they set the category. So again, I haven't even submitted this form, so I don't have a form instance. So I'd have to submit it to see. So let's go back over to the existing form instance. And we'll look at its properties. And we'll also, well, I should have run it, shouldn't I? So let's run it first. We need to click on the form itself. Okay, great. Let's get the form open. Now we can open its properties, and we can see its training documents HR. And then I can go in here and I can change this over to this images. And I guess I have to refresh this. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I got rid of my content list. All right, well, no permanent harm done. and we'll look at its properties. And now I'm in training / images, and I can then reset this, and we'll set this to something completely different. We'll set this to book. And we'll go back in here and we'll just refresh this way. Properties. And there we go. So let's take a look at where we are now. Now I've changed this on the fly, and I've changed it several times. Every time I changed it, it applied the metadata. So let's look at where we are now. We're at training.documents, HR, webinar.publications, webinar publications book, training, training images, and also webinar. So it is just continually adding every time I go in and I change this item. It's just continually adding. So let's pick what's in department. No, what's in, boy, I use HR and IT a lot, don't I? Bid process, categories. That's fine. We'll do that. And so now we'll go back and we'll look at our properties, and it's added bid.process and also bid.process.categories. So bid process and bid process.categories. Those have all been added. All I'm doing is just adding. So sure, this is convenient by allowing me to do things on the fly like this. However, it does have a drawback if I do it this way, which is that every time I make a change, I keep adding metadata to this form. So this form is going to show up in a lot of places, conceivably in places I don't want it to show up because of the way that I have set the metadata. So this is cool. That's a cool thing to do for convenience. But if I'm going to go in and start changing this as an end user all the time, I'm going to end up with basically every single category in the system, which makes this slightly less useful. So it might be wise on your form, rather than doing it on this event, which I did for ease of use, it might be best for you to use after validation, for example, on the form, so that it only changes the or adds the new metadata after the form has been validated. Although even that's probably not best, because if you have some other custom tasks like validate form custom tasks running, this event will run after all of your custom validations run. So you may want to move it down to form completed, which means it's only going to be applied when the form is submitted. So it's up to you on the events, but like any custom task, the event that you choose to run it is important. But if you set it on the category picker 2 event and it runs that set metadata custom task, well, it's going to continue to set that. It's going to continue to set that metadata. So just as a brief shorthand, think about where you want that metadata addition to happen, because the set metadata custom task can be a little tricky, because the set metadata custom task is it just adds a metadata. Now, there is a function to remove categories. So you could go in and just say, I want to remove, all of these categories, but then I'd probably have to run it twice, because it's going to add this category and it's going to remove this category. I don't remember the order of operations, but let's at least test it out since we've got it up here and we can run it real quick. So I'm just going to have it remove everything. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And then we'll go back to my form instance. Oh, let's run it first. Great. And then we'll look at its properties. So we see it has all of these properties assigned to it. So I'm going to go ahead and change this back to documents and HR. And we'll go back and we'll run it. Oh, we'll look at its properties again. And there we go. It's back set to normal. So you can change that. So yeah, with the remove categories, I think it's fine to put it here. You just have to remember you've got to remove it from every parent category. If you've only got one parent category, that's pretty easy. If you have a whole bunch, it gets a little tedious to configure. But okay, good. Good to confirm that I can just remove it from everything and it will apply only the category that I want. So in that case, if I change it to images over here and I refresh the properties, there, it's removed documents and just put it straight in images. And we'll just do it one more time for something unrelated. We'll set it to book again. And that should clear out. Yes, it does. So yeah, that's more reliable. Then you can use the set metadata there. You just have to configure it so that it removes all other metadata whenever this metadata gets set. So pretty easy to do here in my system because I've only got to click the checkbox 7 times. But if you have like 30 of these, it's going to get super tedious. Now, one of the things that you can do though, and I kind of alighted past it because I'm not a fan of text-based changes, but let's go back in here. We'll go to category picker 2 and we'll set our starting category as documents. I am not sure that this is going to work, but we're going to save it. And what ideally it should do is limit me, but I'm not sure that this setting is working. I'll just be honest with you. I think it may be bugged. Yeah. What I would like it to do is do that, but I know that I put in a Jira ticket that it was showing me the entire content list. It should go here. There are some other conflicts though. If I have 2 that are named documents, which documents does it go to? It's an iffy implementation. So it doesn't limit me to just the documents category. It shows me everything. So for the moment, I wouldn't worry about it. And I'm actually not even sure that we're going to fix that. I think based on how people use it, they just want to be able to pick anything. And I think the only way to make this work the way it should work is not to do the text comparison, but to actually have an object picker here that would enable you to pick a specific parent category to use as the starting category, which is weird that it's not here because it is in the knowledge view. All right, so that's everything we need to say about building. Let's actually take a look at something that has been built, which is this completed application. And it uses the same metadata we've been using for this one. So let's talk about some different use cases. So let's go to our document library form and let's explain what it does. So I have a form that enables you to basically upload a document, give it a name, and apply some attributes to it, and to give it some, to give it some additional categories. So the document name is just a name. It doesn't do anything. It is not associated with any metadata or anything. In fact, the only thing that's associated with metadata is the effective date, which links to the effective date attribute in documents. And then, of course, keywords, which links to the keywords attribute in documents. So when I fill out this form, it's automatically going to apply these attributes, which means it will also automatically apply the training and documents categories to this form. And technically, when I upload a document to this form, then it's also going to add those metadata attributes there as well. Now I have this category picker down here, and I wanted it to start in documents, but as we saw, it doesn't, because I wanted to be able to pick either HR or IT. Because in addition to going down to the documents level, I want to split up all of my documents between IT and HR documents. So when we look at the form definition itself, we can look at its metadata tab, and it's set to documents and training. That's just built in. Now, I built this in because I do want to ensure that both all of my form instances and any documents that I upload to the instance automatically get put into the documents category. Because this is a document library. These documents I'm uploading, I want to be able to retrieve and to be able to see those documents as part of a searchable document library that allows me to search, in this case, across the enterprise for documents that'll have the proper metadata. So I have this set here so that by default, everything is going to go into documents. But that's not going to be the end all be all. That's what I have that category picker for. In this case, my category picker's name is cats. And I'm picking that event to run through the category picker. And I'm adding all of the categories and all of the attributes. Now, I don't have to do this because I have actually, did I do link to attribute on those fields or not? And because this doesn't work the way that I wanted it to work, this could be a little dangerous because it's not going to limit it to documents because that thing is broken at the moment. But I don't remember whether when I created this, whether I set those attributes or not. So keywords, they are linked to the attribute. So technically, my configuration of the set metadata custom task is unnecessary. I don't necessarily have to set these attributes. I'm doing so, and I'm using the system variables to set them. And so you can certainly do this whenever you create your application. So if I do it this way, I don't actually need to set any metadata at all on the metadata tab or use the link to attribute feature on the form fields. I can, if I want, set the attributes here in the set metadata custom task. There's more than one way to skin a cat in Process Director. And again, the set metadata custom task gives you complete control over the metadata that gets set and the metadata that gets removed. So it's nice that that is there, but for the most part, by using the link to attribute, I don't need to use the set metadata custom task at all. Although that is for the most part. In this one particular instance, I do need this set metadata custom task to run because I do need to select whether this is going to be an IT document or an HR document. So when we update and run it, and unfortunately, because my category picker is not going to work the way that I want it to work, which is to only show me, which is to start at the documents level and only show me IT and HR. It's going to show me the entire list. But I can go in here and put my document name. So training doc for webinar. And wow, I just really can't type. And I can upload a document. I don't know what document to upload because I've already uploaded 8. But I'll tell you what probably hasn't been uploaded is journal editor. No, I tell you what, let's do this one. Let's do my clinical trial for my imaginary medicine that I named trifluozumab, and we'll upload that as a document. And the effective date, well, it'll default to today, and we'll call this medical pharma pills, whatever. We have a medication here. And now we're going to add well, this is neither IT or HR, is it? But we're going to go into documents and we're going to consider this an IT project. And now we can submit our form. And if we go back into the form instances, well, let me be sure that I save it. I'm going to go back in the form instances. Here is my new document right here. And we'll look at its properties. And we can see that it is an IT document. So it has all the good categories. The keywords are set. The effective date is set. Well, this is all well and good. It's fun and all, but what advantage does this give me? Let's take a look at our forms here. Again, we have 3 forms and they're in multiple categories. So I've got my documents form, and this is what makes my documents library. And then I've got my grievance form, and that is in the forms category. And then I believe leave request is in the forms category too. So I'm in 2 subcategories. So I have 3 forms in 2 subcategories of training. So how would I query these things? So let's go back over to webinar and let's build a knowledge view. So we're going to create a new knowledge view, and there's my K right there. And we will call this our metadata KV. Whenever we are using metadata, I was about to say there's 2 things we're going to do, but actually there's one thing we're not going to do and another thing that we are going to do. The thing that we are not going to do is make any changes on the properties tab. We do not want to specify a specific form or a specific process timeline for our result, at least not in this particular case of what we're about to build. I may, in fact, want to do this in some use cases. We'll talk about that in a second, a little bit later. But in general, if I'm just concerned with the metadata, which is what I am now, I don't want to fill out anything here. Instead, I want to go to the Configure tab, and I want to go down here to this navigation section, and I want to choose Category Navigation. And what this will do will include a navigation pane on the left-hand side of the knowledge view, which I think we saw earlier when we first started. That will show me a list of all of my categories so that I can go through and I can pick metadata categories to navigate through all of the forms that this particular knowledge view is going to return. So I'm going to go into category navigation, and I just want to go, for now, I want to go to training. And it's going to show me everything in the training category. A couple of other things that I want to do. I actually don't have to do anything now. I think if I update and run it, it's basically going to show me what I want to see. And it's going to show me exactly what I want to see. I don't really need to do any more configuration here, but the only reason that I don't need to do any more configuration to this knowledge view is because I only have forms. I don't have any process timelines. I don't have any other items. So Normally what I would do is I would come here, obviously, and turn off all of this stuff and only turn on form instances so that it would only show me form instances. That's not going to have any effect in my case because I only have form instances. Well, actually, that's not entirely true, but we'll get back to that in a second. All right, great. So as we saw, I've got a working knowledge view, and it shows me everything in the training category. And I can navigate through here. I can pick documents. And if I do, my other two of the forms disappeared. I really do need to go back in and change that. Somehow I lost the correct icon for that. That makes me unhappy. If I go over here to forms, it will show me my grievance and complaint form and my leave request form. I don't have anything in images. I think I deleted that. There's my HR documents. There are my 5 IT documents. Okay, now it's got the icon. All right, whatever. And go back up to documents. And then when I go to training, it includes everything. So great. I can now go through all of these items. I'm a pretty happy camper. But wait, there's more. So even though I'm looking in just training here, I can obviously make this a lot more. I wanted to say condensed, and that's not the word. I've completely lost my train of thought. But I can make the number of items returned much smaller and much more particular. I can actually throw in some filters, but that's a little tricky. So I want you to notice the existence right now of grievance complaint and leave request. Because like any knowledge view, this can be filtered. But unlike other knowledge views, while I can filter via metadata, it does have some secondary effects that we need to talk about. So we have keywords attributes for all of these documents here, all of the things that are in the documents category. They have a keywords attribute. So what if I want to filter by that keywords attribute? What will happen? So let's go back to my knowledge view. And let's go to the filter tab. We're going to add a condition. And in this case, the condition we're going to add is metadata, and we're going to filter by attribute. And the attribute we're going to pick is training documents, and we're going to pick the keywords attribute. And we're going to make this to prompt the user when run, and we're going to use contains. We would have to use contains for this particular search because my keywords are going to be a long comma separated list of a bunch of words. I really have to use contains because I'm going to think of a word and I'm going to try to find something with that word. And if that word exists in the long string of keywords, it will return a value. The other reason that I'm using contains, not only because I absolutely have to be able to find a substring inside a much longer string, contains by default will return all records that match a null, which means it'll return everything. If you use equal as an operator, it returns nothing unless it finds an exact match. If you use contains as the operator, it returns everything unless you use the query box here to limit what it returns. So technically, this should return everything, right? I meant to go update and run, but except it doesn't return everything. There are two things missing from this knowledge view. They are the grievance and complaint form and my leave request. They don't show up here. The reason they don't show up here is because I am searching for the keywords attribute that exists only in the documents folder or in the documents category. That's the specific keywords attribute. The grievance complaint and the other form, the leave form, they don't use this attribute. Therefore, they cannot possibly match. And so when I'm searching for that specific attribute, it's getting rid of those two other forms because they don't match that attribute. This, by the way, reinforces what I said earlier about we need to put these attributes at the highest level at which they're shared. In this particular case, documents, both HR and IT documents have keywords, and they both have effective dates. So searching for the keywords attribute, which is an attribute of documents, gives me everything in HR and IT. However, it doesn't give me anything that's in forms or anything that's in images. If I had an attribute of some sort in the training category, that would be great, because if I search for that attribute, it would include everything in all of the subcategories of training. So in that particular case, it would show me both my grievance and my leave forms in the same knowledge view. But simply by adding the filter for the keywords attribute automatically excludes everything that doesn't use that keywords attribute. And by the way, you should be aware that the name of the attribute itself is for your use. Process Director doesn't care about it. If I go into metadata administration just to look at our metadata real quick, and boy, what I wouldn't give for an expand all button somewhere here. Well, I know that I have it in different places, and I've got to look for it manually. Sorry. Okay, in policies, I have effective date and keywords. Same text, not the same attribute. So the policies attribute for keywords and the documents attribute for keywords and effective date for that matter are not the same attributes. And so matching by attribute name, while often convenient for us, that's not how Process Director sees it. So we can't just say, hey, find an attribute that's named keywords. We have to pick a specific attribute. So where you place the attributes is going to determine to some degree how these objects are returned inside Process Director. So let's take a look at the actual form KView that I edited this morning, because I was going to show you, well, this is where I was going to show it to you. I was actually going to show you the attribute differences here, and we were going to watch those two disappear. I've already done that, so I need to go back and re-add this condition in here so that it's back to status quo ante. I just deleted it this morning too. Keywords. Okay. Contains. Okay, now we'll update. Oh, I meant to update and run. There we go. Update and run. So have I picked the wrong attribute? What attribute did I pick? I picked policies. I picked keywords from policies. See, this is how easy it is to make a mistake. Nothing got returned because I'm looking for a completely different attribute that is nowhere in training. This is the attribute I wanted. I wanted that keywords attribute. And now when I update and run it, that should give me all of my documents and my HR and my IT. By the way, there is another way of limiting this as well. Now, I am using training as my basic root level folder, and or root level category, and I'm showing all the categories in training. Now, I don't have to, because if we go back to the knowledge view definition, I can just say, hey, you know what? I only want to see things that are in documents. And that will limit everything I see to just what is in the documents category. So when I update it and run it, I will never see anything in those other categories, including my grievance and my leave forms, because they are not in the documents category. They're in the forms category. So I can go all the way down the tree if I want to limit what categories are visible inside my knowledge view. And so now I'm only showing documents. So I can either see all of them. And by the way, these are just the form instances. And I need to look at one of these so that I can find a keyword that I can use for my filter when I put my filter back in. So there are my there are my HR documents. So there's 4 of those. There are my IT documents. There are those 5. And then there are, okay, where is this document going and why isn't it showing up in my IT? But it is showing up in documents. So was IT not applied to this particular form instance? Um, maybe not. No, because it was a book. No, I used a, okay, I messed this up somehow. So you know what? We're going to make this an IT document. That is the nice thing about being an administrator is I can go in and apply metadata. So we'll just save that. And now when I go to IT, there we go. There is my document showing up as an IT document the way that I wanted. So for some reason, it was only showing up in documents. I want it down here at IT. I don't know what I did, but I probably just did something wrong while I was talking. All right, so let's go back to our form knowledge view. We made that change. Let's put our filter back. Keywords contains and prompt user when run. So we'll hit OK. Oh, sorry, meant to run it, not save and close it. So we'll run it. And now I can put in a keyword. I have a keyword that I grabbed called tablets. And it only shows up my new mobile policy submitted. I can open that up. And as you can see, tablets was the keyword that I pulled out of there. I don't know if I have a, oh, okay. Well, if I put in the word mobile or mobile, I get 2 documents back. So I can actually do these keyword searches right from my knowledge view to, filter out a whole bunch of other stuff, or without a filter, it will just return everything in that category. I have taken this one step further though, from that knowledge view. I built a second one. Now, remember, I am uploading documents with each one of these forms. And the document contains basically all of my metadata. So when we look at the document itself, I suppose we should look at the form instance or a form instance. So I've got the name, I've got the document that was uploaded, metadata was applied, I have the effective dates, and I have the keywords. I set this as the IT category. I don't know what I did. I must have done something wrong, but it doesn't matter. It's set for the IT category. And great. This has all of my metadata and it has my document upload. Do you know what I don't want to do? What I don't want to do is to have to open up this form instance to get access to this PDF file. And I don't have to, because I can now take this metadata because it has been applied elsewhere, and I can create a document knowledge view. It just returns the documents. I haven't done anything really different. I have not associated anything with it on the Properties tab. On the Config tab, I am starting my category navigation at Documents. The one change I made here is on the Options tab, where I'm just returning documents. So it's going to return documents, which is to say document attachments that are attached to that form that match the metadata that I've applied. I don't have a filter here, so we don't have to worry about that. But when we run this knowledge view, simply by going into the options tab and saying only show me documents, and I update and run. And remember, these are document attachments. They are not associated with the content list. They're not uploaded into the content list. Well, I mean, I guess technically they are because they're in a form instance, and form instances have a node in the content list, but they're not directly accessible. They are just document attachments, but I can make them directly accessible. And now I have a knowledge view that actually, I have a document library. And if I want to open up any of the documents in my document library, then it opens it up. By the way, ChatGPT does some cool stuff, way better than the stuff that I created. But every time I want to find a document, I can just find it either in my collection of all documents. I don't have much of a taxonomy here. I've only got HR and IT, but every one of my documents is now available. And because they're all PDF files, and PDF files can be opened in my browser, I actually have a browsable, searchable document library. Again, I could make this searchable. I didn't prior to, but I certainly could by going back into the filter tab, and I can do a keyword search here. That would work exactly the same, assuming, of course, that unlike last time, at this time, I picked the correct metadata attribute to search for, which is training documents, keywords. Okay, and contains and prompt user when run. Now I can update and run this, and I can look at my documents. And if I do a search for I'll do a search for IT, but there's nothing that says IT. Well, we'll do a search for A. Certainly, some of my keywords must have an A. Okay, great. Loss of mobile devices. Clearly, I've got an A in the keywords there. So I can click on loss of mobile devices and it will open for me. Now, I did do one thing to make this work, which is something kind of cool that you can do in Process Director that we don't talk about much, but it is cool because these are documents and they're PDFs, and PDFs can be viewed in a browser. I can perform the open action when I click the entry and set it to open inline in the browser. And with category navigation turned on, if I pick a document, I can see it. That's fine. And then I can just go back to documents or go back to IT or whatever. And I can just pull open the document that I want to see. I never have to leave the knowledge view. It's just always going to give me that document, and it's always going to replace the list part of the knowledge view simply by opening the document in line. And of course, I can also, can I? Thought I could hit the back button on my browser. It doesn't look like I can. Okay, thought I could hit the back button and it would go back, but unfortunately, no, that doesn't work. But I can always just go back and click on one of my other categories and see my documents. So I can actually create a document library that is browsable and viewable in Process Director directly by using metadata, and it just makes things, metadata and attributes just make things a lot easier to find. So well, that's Office. That's the document itself. So I don't know what other keywords I use. So the only one that I can think of is mobile or tablets. And so that's only going to return, well, that's going to be an IT. So it will only return mobile in IT. I thought I had two documents with the keyword mobile. Well, it doesn't matter. Huh. Okay, fine. One, loss of mobile devices. In any event, I have a document library that works and that works off of metadata to do my moving around. Where this comes in most useful in the system is, even though, like I said, these are all in the same folder, where this is really useful is the ability to bring together otherwise unrelated applications. Their forms, their document attachments that can be located anywhere in your system, and to create knowledge views that unify all of those objects, return all of the objects that match the metadata categories or attributes that you're looking for, so that I can do knowledge view queries across the entire system, or at least across the entire partition, to pull all sorts of unrelated information. And when I say unrelated, they're probably functionally related, but in terms of their physical organization in the content list, they're often completely unrelated. And metadata allows me to make them all related, bring them all together, and to query multiple items up to and including the entire system all at the same time. So metadata is very useful. There's a little bit to learn. It requires a little bit of planning. It adds a little bit to your administrative workload because you have to ensure that your metadata gets exported, which, by the way, it's 11:51. I barely have enough time, but I do have enough time to talk about it. Let me reshare. And let's go back to metadata administration. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into our metadata admin screen, and I can either import or export my metadata categories. So I have this new one that I just created called webinar, right? So I can click on webinar and I can hit export metadata categories, and it will export something called, in this case, webinar.xml. It's just a regular XML file, just like any other process director file, but it is XML, not PDZ, because it is not a content list object. And so I can save this into downloads. Downloads? There they are. Downloads. Okay, fine. I was in the downloads folder. So I've saved that to my downloads folder. Now, let us go to a different process director server. My screen is being hidden, so we're going to have to expose that a little bit. Let's go to the documentation server, and I'll log in there as me. And I forgot, I have two-factor authentication on that system. So 567317, and of course, why would it type why? 567317. There we go. That logged me in. And on this system, we'll go to metadata administration. I don't want to be in the advanced training. No, I do have two different partitions on this system. We'll go into our documentation folder and we'll go into the metadata administration for it. As you can see, I don't have much here. I have policies, and now I can import metadata categories, and I can just browse to my downloads folder. Downloads. There's my webinar.xml, and I can import, and I get an import report just like normal. Close that, and now my webinar category taxonomy, such as it is, has now been imported between systems. If I had a new application that had different metadata that I'd had to add, then, as I mentioned previously, what you would need to do is you would need to export and import this metadata onto the target system prior to importing the application that uses the new metadata. But the export import feature, super simple. It works just as you expect and just as it does elsewhere in Process Director. So I don't think we need to have much more explanation than that. In fact, since it's 11:54, we don't have time for much more of anything. So have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. So long.